formal. So do feel free to ask any questions that come up. Um, Also happy to hear any commentary on some of the insights that come through, and certainly there'll be time at the end. But what going to talk about and sort of present today is really like the data that matters. Like one of the things I really care about, there's no point in having data for the sake of data. Can you actually do something? Is it actually meaningful and is it useful? Because I think we're flooded with it left, right, and center. So really understanding and knowing what is it that it does mean for us. There's only a couple of you who may not know me, but Jane Watson, I'm with XY Sense. We're an occupancy sensor company and data analytics, really focusing on global enterprises around the world and helping them understand their spaces, where people are and how they're being used. I'm based here in London and running the UK and a European business. So certainly more than happy to chat anytime in regards to this. But wanted to just first start off in giving a snapshot of what are we seeing here in the more local market, so UK utilisation. And we've now really started to stabilise coming out of the COVID area and returning to work. And obviously, a lot of different policies that are taking place with organisations in what they do want workers to be doing. So for those of you who don't know, we every quarter publish what is called the XY Sense Workplace Utilisation Index. I've got a couple of brochures over there, but this is looking across all of our real estate portfolios, customers that have opted in around what is the actual utilisation within spaces, but also what spaces are being used and when. And so this is able to give us a really rich level of insight as to how the office environment is performing and also allowing customers to benchmark themselves. So I'll just start off here. Actually, I'm going to jump onto the next one here. It's a better sort of picture, but really looking at where are we currently sitting with utilisation in UK and also compared to other regions, APAC and US. And there's been an absolute shift this year in 2024 of people coming back. So we've been talking about it a lot in 2023, a lot of different initiatives to do it, but really the rubber is now hitting the road in terms of how people are using offices. And in fact, when we do actually look at some of these numbers and around a 52%, one of the things that we're not always super cognizant of is pre-COVID, offices were really only operating at 60% utilisation as is. We've now just taken a much higher level of scrutiny of what is a reasonable level. But we can really start to see that UK is leading the charge. And I do know one of the factors that started to drive that earlier on, so when we're looking at UK energy prices about 2 years ago spiking and also the war in Ukraine, what do people care about? A lot of their own costs. And so coming into the office and actually utilising the power within there. And it's a really good example of just where do you get some of those behavioural changes taking place and how do we break some of those habits that we did form during COVID time when we were forced to work at home. And then the other markets where we're certainly seeing a big shift across India and the densely populated areas of Asia, so Singapore, Hong Kong, and certainly we can understand that. Smaller houses, not always, ideal living conditions, and as opposed to Canada, South Africa, US, New Zealand down below, where we do tend to have more space to live and therefore set up a home office. But there's also too a really clear phenomenon that's transpired, and the 3-day working week, but we are starting to see Mondays starting to shift a bit more. So no doubt anyone who does work in an office has noticed or is commuting to an office just how much busier train systems, public transport is, finding a desk on the middle of days of the week. But again, it is also interesting just to look at UK and a more local presence where Mondays here are actually higher than the global average in the middle of the week in many areas. So again, really starting to see a lot of that growth, but certainly Fridays, how much work does take place then? It is a question, but also sometimes I've even heard stories of it's more effective to be on the golf course and networking and working there rather than in the office. We have the proxy, it's the inversion of the Friday. So what is driving back this coming to the office? And we like to think about it, there's this push factors and there's pull factors. And so certainly the push has been from workplace teams, companies about asking employees to come back, even to the point of mandating, and in some areas saying that bonuses are actually tied to occupancy and coming in. Now, some of that can be hard to police. So there is also a need, and particularly in the world that we live in today, where employee experience is certainly very important, of how you're creating those incentives for people to come in. And so that can be things like lunches, coffees, but also what is the environment actually offering and creating for a conducive space that people actually want to work within. And from that, we're starting to see a lot of progress or focus coming through on the learning and developments, and also the recognition that, yes, the office is important for collaboration, whether that's on projects or problems, but also coming together and connecting with peers. And that starts to highlight in some of these factors that's from a CBRE study is what is the proposition of the office? Why do we think about the office? And what does it actually mean for us as individuals? And when we start to look at some of these factors, there's always an interesting distinguishment between what are I statements versus we statements. And so when we think about the reasons of why people are not coming into the office, it's often focused on, I don't want to have the commute. I don't have the time. I get distracted. It's not a quiet space for me. But what are the reasons for coming in? We start to hear a lot more of those we statements. So we need to work together. We actually find better ways of communicating. We need to operate as a team. And I start to really see that highlighting here in either bundling, looking at interpersonal connections or also personal development. And sitting in an island or sort of isolated by ourselves, it is really hard to do either one of those. The other thing that I think is also worth noting here on the personal development and also connections, we've had layoffs in the market over the past 12 months. And so certainly there's definitely been an awareness on the employee front of, hey, I need to be seen, I need to be growing, I need to be connecting and collaborating with my peers because I actually would like to keep my job. And so it's certainly created a much more powerful market of putting some of the power back in the hands of employers. So we're talking about a new frontier of the office and a lot having changed since COVID. But I actually think it's also worth asking the question of, did we have it right in the past? And do we just now know more information and better understand what actually makes a great workplace? Prior to COVID, I don't think we really often questioned, was the office actually suitable? Should we even be going in? What are the work styles we do in the office compared to doing at home? So although we're talking about a new frontier now today in the office environment, is it in fact a new frontier or is it where we've sort of been in the past? But yes, there are some added complications that we now need to think about. And I think we see this with workplace teams are having their time in the sun. So prior to COVID, it was often a back office function, reported into finance, sitting within facilities management, not really thought about or questioned. These are now conversations that are happening and workplace leaders are reporting up into the C-suite level. It is a boardroom conversation, an executive level conversation of what does our office need to be for us and how do we think about our infrastructure, our planning and our systems around it. And there's a lot of questions to think through. How are we rotating teams? Do we need to come in together? Do we need to be segmented? Should teams decide by themselves or should it be directed to them? What should be bookable or what should just be available? And how do we balance that frictionless experience versus also monitoring and making sure we are providing enough space? VC, we now have a lot of technology that is enabling us to work both remotely and in the office, connecting with people who may or may not be at home, but we've also got to think about geographies and different work locations. And so where do we have that, those VC facilities and setups, but where do we also really create spaces that are designed for humans coming together, talking and connecting? And then there's also with the new working styles, we need new space designs. So if we are coming into the office for different reasons or a more purposeful reason than we did in the past, how are we also making sure that those spaces are being provided to employees in order to, again, on the pull factors, create the incentives that it is a worthwhile place to spend time? But despite all of those challenges and new questions that we're asking, fundamentally, workplace teams are still facing the same problems. Aging assets, lease terms, how to negotiate, stay, go for how long, but also what is the employee experience and the space management plan for growing teams, shrinking teams, changing company strategies, changing work styles. So, for all workplace leaders, there's a continuous spectrum of questions and balances that do need to keep on being asked. And so, hence, starting to really look with a greater level of maturity at the data that can help us solve some of these problems. So, this is where we get into what actually matters. Because we could measure everything, we can look at everything, we can get bogged down in the data, but are we actually going to do something with it? And does it actually matter? Where we like to think about it at XY Sense is focusing on the metrics that you can get multiple points of leverage. So a couple of key areas of leverage. One, we've got the employee experience. So how are employees focusing on that? Definitely got the productivity, which is going to bleed straight into the employee experience. People do want to actually do their work when they're applying to do their work. That obviously goes to companies as well. We want productive staff. We want happy staff. We want people engaging highly. And then obviously all of that is wrapped up into a very large cost item for companies. So after salaries and benefits, real estate is typically the second largest expense on a P&L for a business. So at a higher level, one of the key areas to start is almost looking at, well, how many people are coming into the box as one way. So this is really looking at thresholds and counting of when people come in, how many people are coming in, how long are they staying for, and therefore what is the total capacity of my space. So we're able to show this at XY Sense through our entry sensors and also breaking that down by on floors. Now, these floor levels often become incredibly interesting when we're looking at a client meeting space. We may also have teams that are designated to a particular floor. Also, how are you thinking within a financial services company where you may have regulation or other company, life sciences, where there's also two segmentation required of what is the right space to be allocating to a particular team and how do you balance those floors and that total real estate portfolio between groups who cannot necessarily be sitting next to each other and working closely together. And then certainly there's a difference across regions and across sites. So it starts to give us that big overarching picture of what is the total number of people coming into our space and whereabouts. Xero is a really nice example of a company that were looking at this data of how many people were coming in, but they also really set themselves a vibe metric. So if people are coming in, there needs to be enough, the right balance in terms of the number in order to create that environment. And they were actually using some of this data, able to achieve 750,000 in cost reductions just by looking at, well, how many floors could they actually pass off and no longer need it. And so this is just a really good example too of looking what times of the day, when do people come in and how do you curate more of those spaces that are really effective and designed for the people's needs. Now, going in layered deeper, when people are in the box, where are they? How long are they spending time in a particular area? Now, we largely look at sort of two types of areas. Collaboration spaces, which are designed for having multiple people coming together. So it might be a project space, it might be a meeting room, it can also be cafeterias, and also just the more casual phone booth type spots. And then we've also got workstations. Certainly understanding how much time is spent at a desk, what desks are utilised, how teams are looking, creates a really important aspect for understanding those behaviours in the environment. And XY Sense is able to really give you high-level positional accuracy as to where people are in that space at any given time and being able to map that to your floor plans. So as we look at desks, how much time do we actually spend at a desk and what's actually right for us? And it is really interesting to see that 50% of desks in workplaces are occupied for less than an hour every day. Now, I've heard outrage at that of what the hell are my people doing? They're not coming in and being at desks. Are they working? Are they coming in for lunches? What is it? But I think this is where it's also important to look at, well, why are you wanting people to come into the office? Is it to sit behind a screen and look at their computer and just do their work that they could do at home all day? Or is it also to interacting around? Now, that can also vary on a day by day basis. So Tuesday is typically a big meeting day. You may have less time at desks. You also need to look at neighborhoods. So what types of groups or teams actually are more desk bound versus those who are maybe regularly popping up into phone booths or larger meeting rooms that are needed. And so therefore some of those spaces. But we do also need to look at, the number of desks that are required for long focus periods. And part of that also plays into what is the infrastructure and the setup that you're providing to that workplace. So when we start to think about making decisions of what are the types of desks we need, well, how many maybe are super hot desks, just sit down, bang out an email on a laptop, no screens needed, versus we need big focus screens for our longer work. And so here we start to also see a very clear distinction forming in terms of the trends between work points and collaboration areas. And it is clear that when we are coming in to the office, we are certainly spending more time collaborating. And so therefore looking at, well, how do we provide more of those collaboration spaces that are best fit for the types of employees? So as we start to see here, we're currently looking at, in terms of more recent quarter, so Q2 2024, 39% work point utilisation as opposed to 45% collaboration. So there's been a bit more of a balancing out in that, but it is also starting to look at, well, what are the hours spent within that? So as we're getting now a greater view of, okay, when we come in, where are we spending our time? Now, this is also an interesting one. How many times a meeting room is booked versus a meeting room is actually attended in person? Now, the default is typically and traditionally been 6-person meeting. Okay, well, we need a 6-person room. Well, is it 1 person in attendance? Is it 5 people in attendance? Does anyone even turn up, or does everyone decide to work from home that day and you've got a meeting room booked and no one's actually there? And I think the common gripe as well of how often are we in offices walking around trying to find a meeting room and everything says it's all booked, but then we look in and find a bunch of rooms where it's all empty. So it's a really interesting one to start to look at. And this is getting behind the people side of things of there might be an intent, but does it actually transpire through to the actual action that we do? And so definitely a highly popular area to be looking at is the meeting room utilisation of actual utilisation versus booked and intended utilisation. Now this, we can keep sort of going, and I didn't want to go down too much into the rabbit warrens of data, but again, we really start to see some breakdowns of our types of spaces and where that popularity is. So how often are they used and for how long are they used? So we're able to segment across all of these particular spaces, which is all fully customizable for customers. And then they start to get a breakdown of where are their employees wanting to spend their time. And certainly a big and growing focus. How do we use our occupancy data to drive our building management systems, in particular energy systems? And on this, I often think as well too, absence is just as important and interesting as presence. Because when we're not there and we are absent, do we need to have all of these powers and these systems going? And certainly when we do look at a growing cost base, environmental considerations, certainly moving a lot more into that world of how do we automate, make that entire building and workspace work for us rather than us working for them. This Queen Mary University is a really interesting example. So with the shift of the higher energy prices, they found their electricity bill had actually increased £20 million in a year. So any saving on that is actually quite significant. And so they were able to really look at their spaces. Mondays, Fridays, universities are very much the same as workplaces, lower attendance days, of how do they shut down particular areas and then also be able to power off those areas. And they, across those spaces that they were able to sort of power down, there was £3.2 million worth of saving per annum in making that change. So it certainly starts to give you a pretty strong payback. And also for a university, and this is growing across a lot of the workplaces, the demand from their employees or customers, being students, that they are making changes and they're very tangible. So in the old world, it was a cost per desk. Now we like to think about it as a cost per visit. But we also really need to be thinking about that of when we have a visit, what are we actually hoping a person is achieving? So whether that's a client visit, an employee, contractor coming through, how are we making sure that we're creating that environment that is super conducive to their needs, and really starting to think fundamentally about the measurements of it. Just skip through that. But it is also too just interesting to touch on sometimes of what are the reasons for not coming through. Avoiding the commute, as I noted, flexibility and work-life balance, and I'm more productive at home. And certainly these are real factors that we also do need to be factoring into our design. So how might we be providing some of those quieter spaces, but also, again, how are we balancing out, the work patterns that particular teams have over time and therefore what we're asking of them. And we've certainly got some very strong statements. And I think coming back to those I statements versus we statements, I don't want to have the commute. I need flexibility. I have other life balances that I need to be managing, some of the key reasons for not coming in. So bringing all of this together, and there's an art and there's a science. Obviously, the data brings the science, but it's most valuable when we are actually applying it in thinking in a conceptual way about our space. And these are human decisions at the end of the day, so we can't just be purely science-led. We do need to have that art of the human experience. And so it's really, I think, the best workplace leaders we do see, those who are really able to balance this science with this art and make contextualized decisions. And whether that is around the workplace experience in a hybrid world, smart buildings and sustainability, controlling costs, and also being very data-driven. So just to conclude, making all of these changes in a quick succession is hard work. I know I'm seeing some customers in this room, it's been a couple of years for the journey and a long time sort of stage rollout, but there certainly is, and we really encourage, start to crawl, walk, run. And this is an ongoing journey. We are going to continue having workplace changes, and we're also going to have continuous changes in the infrastructure that's available to us and what our employees are asking of us. So more than happy to take any questions, and also more than happy to keep the conversation going with anyone. Dan.
Can I have a selfish question? Can you talk about the benefits of being part of the Smart Spaces ecosystem and what an integration with Smart Spaces does for your business and our business?
Yeah. So with all of our technology partners, the best partnerships come when you've got multiple technologies coming together that complement each other. So we can give you the occupancy data, but again, how do you transfer that through to something that's really actionable? So a great example is Smart Spaces of how are you enabling the employee experience with the meeting booking rooms, desk booking, wayfinding, availability, knowing when people are coming in, knowing how long cafe lines are going to be, and therefore spending time. So these are all, and at XYSense, we're very conscious too of sticking to our bread and butter. We do really well occupancy management at an accurate and high level, but how we can feed all of that information into other technologies that, like yourselves, have got focuses on your key areas in order to deliver those end benefits to more.
Yeah, hi. I'm Nick from Class Group. So part of our group is we have an interiors design and build business. So I guess a good question would be are you seeing companies using this tech before to inform design, because we often kind of do something and then try and kind of assess it and then change it afterwards, but that's a bit inefficient. So I guess there's a lot of data you can learn from it to inform the design up front. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say inefficient and also very expensive mistakes to make. So one of our customers, a big global organization, they had actually been using this data for a number of times in a couple of their US offices. One of the things in particular they saw is the number of meetings taking place, 1 or 2 people. And so as they were designing their new office that they were moving into, where they did have a lot of large meeting rooms and areas, actually changing a lot of that design to implement more phone booths. So it's exactly, again, meeting where employees are at, the behaviours that they're taking place, and making sure those spaces are certainly designed. I think also to a lot of thought going into, well, how much space? So all right, we thought we might be able to get rid of 2 floors. Can we actually get rid of 4 and still have a really good employee experience on it? So yes, you can avoid making the costly decisions, but you can also look at how do you make decisions in a more economically viable way too.